let's take a little break away from all the coronavirus stuff and let's talk some baseball. No one better to do that with than really one of the nicest guys in broadcasting. He is the play-by-play voice of the Detroit Tigers, Dan Dickerson, joining us via Zoom. Dan, thank you very much for taking a couple of minutes for us today.
You bet, Dave. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. You're at your home? Is everyone okay and healthy? And how are you guys doing?
Yeah, my son is a senior at Michigan State, and he's back home finishing, unfortunately, his last semester online. My daughter's a few years older, and she's at Grand Valley State in occupational therapy grad school, and she's got a little break right now, but she's been pretty busy doing that. Then her next semester starts in a few days, and my wife is teaching her journalism classes online for Michigan State. So I'm the cheerleader right now.
Who thought that you would have all this free time at the end of April and May, huh?
No, it's very strange. I mean, certainly enjoying time with everybody, and let's face it, the upside is bonus time with my family that, as you said, wouldn't normally be getting at this time of year.
Well, Dan, we appreciate you taking a moment for us on the show today. And people all around Oakland County, that we wish we had our baseball. We're watching the replays, but, yeah, it's nice for a while, but, it is what it is. Is baseball coming back? Do you have any inside knowledge or even just you have a crystal ball that you can share with us?
No, I think there's been some really good reporting. Ken Rosenthal, Jeff Passan have both written long pieces in the last couple of days talking about some of the things. Those are two pretty connected guys with, I think, the thinking of Major League Baseball. And I think that the biggest point is baseball is thinking about any possible way to come back and all possible ways to come back. So that's why fans are probably wondering why they're hearing so many different ideas. I think it's because, you're really trying to be flexible. You're trying to adjust to a changing landscape every day. So you're hearing, could be Arizona and Florida, could be Arizona, Texas, Florida. The latest idea from Bob Nightingale, which I think has some real possibilities. 3 10-team divisions arranged geographically, west, central, east, and teams would play in their home ballparks without fans, or maybe by the end of the year, proper social distancing fan bases where you might get a few thousand people in, which is better than zero, right? So I think all those things are being explored. I think baseball's made it very clear that they are abiding by what experts are telling them. They are being guided by the experts, and large public gatherings obviously are not coming back anytime soon. And that's why you're probably not going to see fans in the ballpark to start. I do think you could do it now that we're all accustomed to social distancing. I think you could spread fans out in very specific areas of the ballpark and maybe have a few fans in the ballpark by the end of the year. But they're very clear about this. Player safety comes first. Think of all the staff. Think of the trainers. Think of everybody who's going to be in contact with those players. And I think the thing for fans to watch, every plan I've seen relies on regular testing. And until I think testing becomes widespread enough, and certainly there are shortages in many parts of the country, I think that's going to be certainly will help determine when they can restart, because they want to be able to test, obviously, players every day. And that's going to be a lot of players. The rosters will be expanded. The best guess, educated guesses are, 40, 50-man rosters, because you're going to need, the normal, that's a normal season, is you're going to have 45 to 55 players come and go. So that's a lot of players to test every day. That's a lot of staff. Think of the support staff. That's another several hundred people league-wide. So those are things to watch for fans. I think when you get that feeling that, okay, we can assure ourselves that everybody's healthy at the start of every day, and then if somebody does get sick, they would be quarantined. Until we get to that point, I think it's going to be really tricky to put any of these plans in place. But they're getting creative. They're thinking of all the ways they can do it, because yes, the money is a big part of it, but a season without baseball, what it would do to the sport itself would be pretty drastic.
Well, and just the return of baseball, the symbolism of the return of baseball, and the impact on the American psyche is immeasurable. I mean, let's be honest. If we can get baseball back, we let's make some accommodations, but let's get baseball back. Of the major four sports here in our country, baseball is, I guess you can call it a contact sport, but there is a little bit less contact between players in baseball than you would have certainly in basketball and maybe even in football. So it may be a little bit more practical to get baseball rolling than it might be some of the other sports. What do you think?
Yeah, and the more, the more I thought about it, because I've been very skeptical just because of the lack of testing. But I do think that, if everybody comes back and they're tested, and obviously everybody starts with a clean slate, right? Only those who have tested negative or who have the antibodies are allowed to come back. Then because we are used to the new physical distancing protocols that we live with every day, nobody's gotten sick so far that I know of in baseball. Well, just keep practicing those things that you've been doing. So if, let's go with the Bob Nightingale USA Today plan, 3 10-team divisions, you're going to be, players rent apartments, houses here. So your daily routine will be, you're at your home, you go to the ballpark, you know that you're going to a ballpark where everybody that you will come in contact with has been tested negative or has the antibodies. When you're home and you have to go to the grocery store, your family, everybody's going to practice good social distancing, wearing a mask, wearing gloves, whatever, those things really do help in terms of preventing the spread. And so keep doing the things you've been doing, and maybe an extra precaution if you're not wearing masks every day, you wear a mask. I really think you can keep everybody healthy, because I think we've really gotten used to the whole idea of how you stay healthy. And so far, all major league players that I've heard, even minor league players, have been able to do that for now 6 weeks. And everybody would understand how important it was to do this every time you go out to a public place that is indoors.
Yeah.
So I think you could do it even without mass testing, but I'm just saying that every plan I've seen involves mass testing every day. I think we've gotten used to enough to physical distancing that you could pull this off.
Dan Dickerson joins us, the play-by-play voice of the Detroit Tigers. Have you had that dream yet, Dan? I mean, I dream about all kinds of crazy things, and we're having the craziest dreams now. I don't know if you've noticed it. Have you had that dream yet where you're in the press box and you're in the play-by-play booth and you're doing the game and there's no fans anywhere? Have you thought about what that might be like, Dan Dickerson?
Oh, I've thought of it. I haven't dreamed of it. I still have dreams where it's like I woke up late and couldn't get to the ballpark. That's never happened, but it's like, the old college dream where you wake up and your term paper's due today. That's the dream that I have every now and then. Why am I late? I don't know. You have to think about it, because I think that not just because it's my job, but I mean, it's going to be, I think radio and TV broadcasts are going to be extremely important with no fans in the stands. So you do picture it, and you realize that, you're going to call the game the same way. Obviously, I love, any broadcaster does, feeding off the fans and the crowd noise. But if you don't have it, okay, you're still going to call the game. You're still going to call the game, as best you can. You're going to have to bring maybe that energy that the crowd might have provided. We had small crowds, let's face it, last year at Comerica Park, and it didn't change the way I called the game. I mean, you still love the competition. I was talking with Matt Boyd about this the other day. He's like, hey, it's going to be weird without fans, but he said, believe me, we're competitors, and I still want to beat you. And the motivation shouldn't be just playing for the fans. It's you and your teammates, and you're still, if you are at the major league level, the competition, I think, will still be very good. And I thought he made a good point. Who are you playing for? Yourself, your teammates, or the fans? Sure, the fans are a big part of it. Don't get me wrong. But his point is, even without fans, if this is how we have to do it, you're going to see very competitive, intense baseball. So maybe you see, hear a little more trash talking. So be ready for that.
All right. Well, Dan, we're counting the minutes, and we're really looking forward to baseball coming back. 2 quick questions before we say so long, because I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking time for us. Can you tell the story about how you got your break as a broadcaster for the Detroit Tigers?
Sure. I mean, there are 2. I always look back. It's everybody's path to the booth is different. Mine was a 20-year path from 1980 when I graduated college to 2000 when I got to the booth, and it kind of went a little bit like this. It wasn't a straight path. I was in news, as most people know, for a good portion of my career. I look at two key moments, though. Chuck Swirsky was my boss at WJR when I became a full-time sports guy in the mid-'90s, and I'd given him a tape and of a just practice that I'd done. And I encourage, and every young broadcaster, I think, here's the same advice: practice your skills by going to the venues and just calling the game into a tape, recording device, whatever it may be. And so I'd given Chuck a tape of my practice play-by-play of a Lions exhibition game. Well, long story short, I went from sideline reporter to filling in for Frank Beckman when Frank was doing Tiger baseball, and then he would rejoin the U of M broadcast in October. And that was my first big break. So instead of a guy who used to do high school football in Grand Rapids, now I'm doing a major sport in a major market, 3-4 games a year for, I think, 3 or 4 years. So that led to Michigan basketball play-by-play. And so that was a key moment because, again, you're an established play-by-play person now in Detroit, and that made it what seemed like a real leap of faith for the Tigers to take in 2000. It made it less of a leap to me that I could be the play-by-play guy. And it all came about because Ernie Harwell, bless him, gave me, and every time I think about this, it gives me chills. I mean, he gave me 1 inning of play-by-play in the last game at Tiger Stadium. Steve Courtney and I did pregame and postgame for Tigers baseball broadcast a few weeks before that final game in '99. With anybody who was there or watched it, those memories are seared into your brain cells, I'm sure. It was such a big day, and so we were planning the pre and post for that day. That our broadcast on WJR went from 6 a.m. when Paul W. Smith took the air to midnight. So we were planning it, and I was told a few weeks before that I might be able to join Ernie Harwell in the booth for the last 3 innings because Jim Price, my partner now, his partner then, was going to get ready for the post-game show after his inning of play-by-play. So I'm like, sure. I mean, what am I going to do? I'll have the best seat in the house. So in the middle innings, when Jim was doing his play-by-play, Ernie stood up and the booth, picture a booth that's, 8 by 6. I mean, it's tiny. And I'm standing there just listening in so I don't repeat anything that they've been saying. And Ernie stood up in middle innings and he said, so what's the plan here? I'm thinking, great. Nobody told Ernie Harwell. I mean, he knew who I was, but nobody told him what the heck I'm doing in the booth right now. So I said, I think I'm supposed to join you in the top of the 7th inning and stay out of your way until the end of the game. He said, you want to do an inning? And I'm like, no, it's your last 3 innings at Tiger Stadium. He said, no, do you want to do an inning? And I wasn't going to say no twice because I was actually prepared. I mean, I'd prepared because I thought originally I was going to do 1 inning, that Jim was going to leave an inning early. And so he said, here's the plan. I'll come back in the top of the 7th inning and I'll introduce you for the bottom of the 7th. You do the bottom of the 7th and the top of the 8th. Now think about this. His last 3 innings at Tiger Stadium, where he's called home for how many decades? And he's giving one of those last 3 innings on a day when the emotions are high and the flash bulbs are going off every pitch, giving one of those innings to me. And I don't think there's any question that, and he did a great job of, the style for him was generally there wasn't a lot of byplay with his partner because that's how it started. I mean, he was solo starting out in the 1940s. So, but with me, he would, folks, you're listening to the major league debut of Dan Dickerson. Dan, when was your first ball game here? I mean, just anything he could to make me feel comfortable. And it worked because I did. And then, but I do think that 1 inning, Dave, really helped get me into the booth the next year when they decided to add a middle innings play-by-play guy to the booth, a 3-man booth, really for the first time. And that 1 inning, I don't think there's any question, it helped get me to that spot.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. It's a great story, and it says an awful lot about Ernie Harwell, who we miss so much. You've done an amazing job of filling those enormous shoes, and we really enjoy spending our summers with you. I know we're tight in time. I got to let you go, but before we do, your thoughts on the passing of Al Kaline.
Well, it was just one of the real joys of this job for the last 20 years. I've been getting to know Al Kaline. I mean, knew him a little bit because we'd, been around the ballpark in the late 90s, but to get the job, and Yeah, his friendship with Jim Price meant that he would stop in the booth all the time, and they'd harass each other and swap lies and tell stories. And I always loved just listening in. But the fun part was on those days, maybe when Jim wasn't there and Al would stop in, that just the conversations you would have, or if I'd just interject into their conversation. And it was really fun because here's a guy who was, with the organization for so long. And, a special assistant, that's a tough job. Meaning that, how do I make myself useful? I'm a special assistant to the GM. What does that mean? Well, it's a pretty open-ended job. And he looked at it as, okay, I'm here to give you any information that you would like. And he was an on-field instructor until recent years. But he got out of the clubhouse every day. This is how he was able to connect with kids across generations, players that, were 60 years younger than him. And he would go down in the clubhouse, and sometimes he'd just sit there, and he wasn't enforcing himself on anybody. For some years, I think he was frustrated that young players weren't coming up and talking to him, but he just wanted to be there if they had questions. But in recent years, I think it was really gratifying to him that players would come up and talk to him and pick his brain a little bit about life, about baseball. But he was so sharp, Dave. That's why I love talking with him. It's like, what are you seeing in this guy? What do you think about the team right now, how they're playing? He didn't miss a thing, and he always had he wasn't coming in spouting opinions, but if you asked him, he always had an answer because he watched the game so closely and he had so much to offer. And it was just a pleasure to get to know the person and this Hall of Famer who, everybody idolized growing up, and to have him in the booth on a regular basis and to get to know him on that level was one of the joys of the job. And, let's face it, he was the face of this franchise for 6 decades plus, going back to the mid-'50s. And that's pretty special. He was a special person.
He was, and you are as well. Dan, thank you very much for taking all this time today. We appreciate it. It helps us all feel a little bit closer to the game we love, and really good to connect with you. Fantastic stories, and a nice little break from everything else that's going on in our world right now. I really appreciate you sharing that with the folks around Oakland County. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thank to you for all the good work you're doing and keeping people informed in this area about what's going on and what we need to do to try to get things back to some semblance of normalcy.
Well, we that's greatly appreciated, and we will get there, and a big part of it will be baseball, and we'll all be smiling ear to ear the day that we get to tune in and hear Dan Dickerson back on the radio calling the games. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I look forward to that day as well.
All right. Dan Dickerson, he is the play-by-play voice of the Detroit Tigers.